Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And the topic of this 10-minute moan is considering and looking to open up a debate as to why certain people from a certain side of the political spectrum seem fair game for the media, while others not so much. And I've been seeing a lot of stuff. Obviously, the big example of this is Tommy Robinson, okay? But I've been considering things on a more local scale. And two things that I've been thinking about recently was the Tommy Robinson story that he done in the documentary where he called out racism for going the wrong way. And that reminded me of a podcast I've done recently with Audrey Dempsey, who's a Labour councillor who up here tried to motion a question about racist attacks of white kids and teachers in Glasgow and got absolutely slaughtered in our media. And I was also thinking about Tommy Robinson himself and the fact that he is right of centre and the media slaughter him at every possible turn. And I thought about that more locally. And my memory took me back to a story in the paper a couple of months ago. I think there have been at least two that I can think of, about a young Scottish activist who is right of centre and has been politically active for both Conservative and Reform parties recently. And guess what? Gets slaughtered by their media. And it got me thinking, why? Why is this happening? Who's behind it? And the ridiculousness of what they write. Now, I've seen some stories written about Audrey Dempsey, the councillor, and I've seen some stories written about John White, who's a young activist I'm going to talk about. And they're just complete lies. Just absolute complete lies made up for one aim, and that is to suggest these people are racist. And it seems like they're all distracting about, but it keeps getting repeated. And it's not just a national problem, and with things as big as Tommy Robinson. We're seeing it now in Scotland. And those two people are good examples of what I'm saying, where things they've done have been completely misstrued, turned around, and flung out in the public domain to tell you these two people, Audrey Dempsey, John White, are racists. I know them both, I've spoken to them both. Audrey a lot more, granted, than John, but I've not seen much to suggest stories of them being racist are correct. And the interesting thing about John's story, it was a bizarre set of circumstances that put me in touch with him. I was flicking through my social media one night, I think it was a Saturday night a few months ago, and I scrolled past a photograph of him at a family celebration. And with it, I didn't post anything about it, I didn't comment on it, and within about half an hour to an hour, I got a phone call, my phone showed up, an old friend of mine, an old friend from kids' football days. Known him about 15 plus years. And I thought, I spoke to him before. Answered the phone. How you doing, big guy? I'm at a family celebration with a relative of mine, and your name's just came up. And he doesn't believe that I know you. And the person he was talking about was young John White, the activist John White, right, who's doing a great job and has done for a wee while now. So it was just a funny situation. They were at a party, celebration, so I was going to be having long conversations with either of them at that point. But I said, look, I'm a fan of his work. He seemed to suggest John was a fan of my work. I said, give John my phone number and we can speak at any time. He's a good lad. Pass on my thanks for the work he's done. So a couple of days later, John and I spoke. We spoke at length, and we've spoke, I think, once since then. So, we're no like busy mates or anything. But he's a young lad at 21 who's doing a sterling job on the ground, grassroots, for politics. And I asked him, because I thought it was unusual of a man of his age who is still going through his education. He's got some big hopes for himself going forward, and I'm sure he'll achieve his goals in the industry that he's decided to be a professional in, and just for the record, it's no politics. It's quite an honourable profession, and I wish him luck in his profession. And we chatted about the story, the first story that was put in the paper about him, a bad story, and it was he'd been at some event in Europe for, you know, young politically minded people, and he came across a guy who was going up for election and friends for one of the right of centre parties. And then when the guy, I believe, won his election, John reposted that he, you know, passed on his congratulations to a fellow young guy that he'd met in the past. Perfectly normal. This story then appeared in the Scottish newspapers telling us that John was out canvassing in France for this guy, and how they were the far-right, terrible fascist party, and young John was just the same as these people. And you go, what? And at that point, it was during the election, and John was helping friends of his who were Conservative candidates, and he was helping them with their campaigns, and he was out, you know, chapping doors and things with them. And you go, well, how do you turn this? They did meet this guy in France, and it was not out campaigning for him, and it was a thing for young people with, you know, involvement in politics. And that turns into a story in a Scottish paper that he's out canvassing for a far-right, bigoted, racist people in France. Complete nonsense. And then there was a follow-up story when he then started campaigning for reform. And they've just regurgitated the same story a couple of weeks ago. You know, about a month after the election. And it's bonkers. And I would say, in Scotland, for young people, John White is probably the most active, most successful, most intelligent young person involved in politics. And he's getting hounded. And what I find really peculiar, those that have followed the channel for a while will remember one of the things that really boosted my platform at the time was when I got emails that I'd obtained through a Freedom of Information about Hamza Yousaf and the donations that he overturned, by the way, the cabinet minister's decisions on who to give the money to. He decided not to give it to where they wanted and give it to his charity of preference, UNRWA. And I had that story, and I knew it was newsworthy. And I gave it to 2 Scottish newspapers. Both those Scottish newspapers, journalists, when they got it, seemed very keen on the information that I had. Yet both sat on it for a few weeks. And then I got the Dear John text one day that they couldn't stand them up. The story went to the national paper, the Telegraph. They had no problem standing it up. I'm no expert in journalism or PR, but through a campaign I had 10 years ago on a non-political thing, I got to understand how newspapers operate and how they work and the things you have to go through to get an article in print. I gave them lots of stories back in the day. And 2 Scottish newspapers, who now are oddly enough attacking John, there may be a connection there, couldn't stand these stories up that I gave them with the backup I had for my stories were documents from the Scottish Government. The Telegraph had the same documents for about 48 hours and put it over their front page. Can you see where I'm going with this? Now, I'm not suggesting journalists are one thing or another, and I'm not suggesting that all the time stories don't get in newspapers. It's the journalist deciding, I don't want to put that story in the newspaper. But they need to get their stories through editors, and that sometimes can be a problem. So I just want to put it out there. I just want people to consider what I'm saying, and I want them to possibly start debating why people like Audrey Dempsey and people like young John White. And by the way, this is the odd thing, both of them on different sides of the spectrum here, because Audrey was a Labour councillor, so she's left the centre. John an activist. He was a candidate for a council a long time ago, but right of centre. Both of them, as soon as people can tag something to them about racism, they do it. And Audrey's was for highlighting a story about white children and teachers being racially abused in Glasgow schools. And John made out to be a racist because he was apparently campaigning for a far-right party in France, which I don't think is true. So the drive isn't actually, you can't say it's a left-wing or a right-wing drive, because there's people on both sides of that thing that I hate, and that is the spectrum of politics. We should find better ways of describing people. Both victims of media campaigns against them, which are totally wrong. And I'll vouch for either two of them, because I've not met John. I'm hoping to do that going forward, because he's a great lad. I've met Audrey, and I've spent lots of time on the phone to both of them. And I would stand by any of them, both of them, before I'd stand by the majority of politicians that we have in the media in large. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed the video on the topic. I hope you consider what I'm saying, and we can start, open and discussing these things, querying these things going forward. So, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please hit the subscribe and the notification bell. But and comments below, brilliant. That's a great topic to start a debate. Let's chat about it. Give us your feedback. But most importantly of all, unless you're anybody that wants to control our judiciary or police or government, or indeed our media, for their own ill-gotten gains and not for fairness and truth and justice. Not you, but
everyone else. Have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.